You're listening to the 49 Carats Podcast, a 49ers Goldmine production with Stephanie Sanchez.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome to another edition of the 49 Carats Podcast. I'm your host, Steph. It is Monday, February 26th, and we just got some news about who the 49ers are interviewing in their search for defensive coordinator. So we're going to talk about it. Joining me to do that today, as always on a Monday, Weston P. Smith. How you doing today, man?
You always make me smile when you throw the middle initial in there for me, make me feel real proper. I'm doing great, Steph. I'm looking forward to it. I don't know how much news it is. I think we all knew some of the names, but I think it's just interesting how this defensive coordinator story has played out, and certainly not how I would have anticipated the decision to be made, but plenty of time for us to talk about that over the next 45 minutes or so.
Exactly. So I'll just get into it here. And basically, this news came from Matt Mayoko about an hour or so ago, at this point, maybe 2 hours ago. And he put out this piece saying that the 49ers, directly from Kyle Shanahan, said that they had interviewed Los Angeles Chargers head coach, or former head coach, Brandon Staley, and an internal candidate, Nick Sorenson, who is the 49ers defensive passing game specialist. Along in this piece, he also mentioned that Daniel Bullock's, the 49ers defensive backs coach, is also going to be interviewing later this week, as well as some outside candidates. So look out for that as well. I'm sure maybe with the combine, you just never know. We'll hear some whispers, I'm sure. I won't be at the combine, but I'm sure we'll get some of those whispers on the timeline, as we so often do for a combine week. Now, you said you're not really sure about how this is all going down. Tell me about your concerns about it so far.
Everything in my gut tells me that this is going to be an outside hire at this point, because I feel like if it was an internal hire, like, hey, why weren't these interviews with Sorenson, Bullocks, Kasurik, anybody else whom you might be entertaining, they should have already been done. Like, they should have been wrapped up, completed. That should have been priority number one the day after you let go of your defensive coordinator, especially as we're jumping into the off season, right? Combine's here, which means free agency is about to start. The league year is about to begin. The draft is going to be here. And my concern relative to this is if it's going to be an outside hire, like, gosh, we're cutting it awful tight, especially if it's going to be something that is going to change the scheme in some element. And to me, like, Brandon Staley changes the scheme a little bit, right? So I'm a little leery of that. I don't think he's not my favorite choice, but by all accounts, all reports, the names that you just mentioned I'm more curious as to who these other outside folks are. Like, I think we're pretty confident who the internal candidates are. Even Brandon Staley, these names have been floated for the last week and a half. Yeah. So, like, for it to just be happening now just feels like, honestly, poor management and poor timing, if I'm being really transparent about it. I just would think that this would be a bigger priority than it really seems to be for the 49ers.
Well, that's definitely an interesting way to look at it as well, because the way I'm choosing to look at it, maybe it's just me and my, optimism that can sometimes be too much optimism, is that I'm thinking, maybe Kyle is taking his time on this because he doesn't want to rush into the next defensive coordinator. I mean, this is kind of a big deal. Who's going to be taking this over? I mean, he saw the mistakes he made with Steve Wilkes. He doesn't want to repeat those mistakes. He wants to look at all of the options, right? I'm not convinced that the internal options are the 49ers or Kyle Shanahan's favorites right now. And so given that, like, I think there's a lot of research that has to be done on possible guys you want to bring in for interviews. So, even though there were rifts with Steve Wilkes early in the season, and we kind of already knew this was going to happen. The actual preparation of it and research that goes into it, that didn't happen till after the season, because realistically, Kyle isn't in the middle of a week game planning thinking, who might be a good candidate when I eventually fire Steve Wilkes, right? So yes, I'm sure there were some names top of mind for Kyle Shanahan, and maybe it's the names we already know of, right? The Brandon Staleys, the two internal ones that we know. And quite frankly, I think Brandon Staley is more of a doing a favor for your agent kind of interview because they share the same agent, and I think it looks good, right?
Yeah.
Be nice with with someone you guys share an agent with. So yeah, I mean, I just think that he's taking his time. I think it's fine. I do understand what you're saying. Like, the combine is coming up. You would want to have your defensive coordinator to have some hand in that, some just to give some feedback, opinions on whoever's there, maybe be that, I don't know. I do understand that part. And you raise a good point too, that if they're gonna think about changing scheme, that'd be something good to know before the combine, because you'd have to account for potentially new players who then fit that scheme. As much as Kyle Shanahan did say that he was open to the idea, I honestly don't think it's really, I don't think he's as open to it as he made it seem.
Meaning that he's probably leaning more internal than he is external.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think honestly, and we've been talking about it. I think.
Sorry, not the scheme thing. Like
Oh,
I
okay. Yeah.
think
Yeah.
he was sorry, I was reading the comment as I was like, yes, I tend to do that at work as well. Don't tell my boss. Uh I was just saying, like, for the scheme thing, I don't think Kyle Shanahan is as open to it as he's made it seem.
I don't think he is either. I just don't think it's the way his roster's constructed, and I think that's what's making this like crazy for me to digest. Because I agree with you, right? I mean, you want this to be a prudent decision. You want them to be comfortable with it, but my concern is just the timing. And if this tends to be somebody who is not in the building today, who has a desire to run a different flavor of the defense. Well, this is like a critical time because I understand that not all of the resources are about the combine and just the draft. There are other ways to plug holes. We'll talk about those in a little while, but I feel like I would want my person in position, almost looking at this like a spreadsheet. Got it. This is the roster, how it's constructed today. Middle column, this is what I want to do and the tweaks that I want to make to this existing scheme. What gaps do I need to fill? And, the first glimpse at like, I want my defensive coordinator or any coach on my team to be in watching the combine intently saying that this guy fills a gap, that guy fills a gap, this guy fills a gap, this guy fills a position of need, whatever it might be. But like, they don't have a job at the present moment. Like, how intently are they watching? You know what I mean? This is the off season for the unemployed, right? The league year hasn't begun yet. So for me, it's not, I don't want a rush decision. But as much as we feel like they're taking their time, I also feel like it means it's getting rushed because there's going to be, my gut tells me that before players take the field on Thursday, maybe worst case Friday, like a decision's made. Like you can't let it go longer than that, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fair. Now, do you think that the fact that it's taking longer and going now into this combine week, that it could be a bigger fish? Because I'm getting that growing sense. Like if it was an internal candidate, if it was a guy you're close with, like Brandon Staley, the three people we know of so far who have or are going to interview for this position, they're all like, kind of in the same realm of, guys who know Kyle already. So I would think they're kind of lower on the list. And then now these external candidates are maybe bigger fish for Kyle Shanahan. And I'll also say just the fact that Kyle Shanahan offered this information, this information to Mayoko, obviously knowing he was going to put it out to the media, throw him a little bone. These are the three names so far. I don't want you guys to know who else we're thinking right now, but it's big.
Yeah, of course. Kyle wanted you and I to know. What else were we going to talk about on Monday, February 26th, right? He's like, throw them a little bit of something to rap about. I do think, I agree with you, Steph. I do think the prolongment of it does to me signify that maybe there is a bigger name. I won't say multiple, but maybe just a bigger name involved in this equation. And they want to do the proper due diligence and do the proper escorting of that individual, right? And those things I'm not going to speculate or guess who it's going to be, but the truth is like all of the outside candidates that we have mentioned by name, right, are bigger names. They're all former head coaches. Some of them are Super Bowl winning ex-head coaches or ex-players that were Super Bowl winners, right? Like there are some big time fish out there. I don't know. I just like, there's just a part of me that's like, just wrap it up. Just freaking wrap it up.
Yeah, I'm already patient. Getting the sense. I've only been talking to you for like about 10 minutes here, and I'm like, Jesus, okay, I'm not the one making the decision, Weston. Jesus.
It's not that time of year. Like this is, like this should be all like the structure should be in place, and now it should be building the blueprint. You know what I mean? Around it.
But I mean, what does a week of a difference do to like in this whole thing?
Well, I mean, we're 2 weeks away from the league year, right? So we're 2 weeks away from, or give or take, right? So 2.5 weeks away from the league year beginning, 2.5 weeks away from free agency beginning, and we all know the legal tampering period, and then the first 2 days of free agency is where you're going to make your splash. And if you're a new defensive coordinator and you're looking for some tools in your belt, you want to be part of that, right? And every day lost.
Yeah, I kind of wonder how much flexibility Kyle will allow or input Kyle is going to allow a new defensive coordinator to have in roster decisions, just because Isaiah Oliver didn't work out too well. In fact, he was cut a couple of days ago by the 49ers, and as we know, that was a Steve Wilkes guy who he decided to bring in, and of course Kyle had to agree to it, so it's not like it was just Steve Wilkes who made that decision, but obviously had a huge say in it. So it'll be interesting going forward to see if we see that same level of trust with whoever the defensive coordinator is going to be in, say, like personnel input.
So let's play devil's advocate for 1 second, Steph. If you are Brandon Staley, Bill Belichick, Pete Carroll, Mike Vrabel, right? Any of these big names that we've talked about from the outside, and you're interviewing and you agree to interview for this role, and the head coach basically lays the wood saying like, listen, I'm controlling personnel, like all these decisions. Why on earth would you take the job? Right? So if that's going to be the case,
that's another thing.
It's probably internal, and just get it done. Just get it done. Your staff. I don't like.
It's like that. It's like that one meme from like Glee where it's like, I'm gonna create an environment that is so toxic. Kyle's over here saying, I'm gonna create a job that's so undesirable that I just have to go with the internal hire. Now I'm just joking, but I kind of hope that Kyle isn't pigeonholing whoever he's interviewing, any candidate too much in all of this, because then. And maybe he would just do that for certain candidates, right? Like a Bill Belichick, of course, would demand the respect and the flexibility to do what he does and has always done to an extent. But then you have the other candidates who are like, no, you got to do it my way kind of thing.
Who do you want, Steph? Who do you want them to hire?
I mean, honestly, I want the big fish. I want the big fish because
Like the big,
I
big
I
fish.
yes, I want one of the big fishes. And when I
Okay.
say big fishes, I'm talking about Bill Belichick, Pete Carroll, all very unlikely names
Mhm.
are the ones that I want. And I'll even throw in Jeff Ulbrich in there, right? Who,
49er
you know,
legend Jeff Ulbrich.
and his name is has kind of generated some steam in, 49ers fans circles as well. And yeah, that one's probably unlikely too, just because currently he is the Jets defensive coordinator. So that does complicate things a bit. Now, does the fact that they're kind of taking their time in this kind of suggest they would explore that route too, right? Like someone who's hired somewhere else, and it would be a lateral because you got to line up those ducks before making that you negotiate with the Jets, whatever it would be for, making that move. Uh, I don't know. Just it just kind of makes me think he could very well be an option.
I I'm starting to think, and keep me honest here, the longer that this goes, the more likely it ends up becoming an internal candidate. And I think that is more about like, hey, the more time that is applied to this decision process might mean that the new coach is missing out on important time to develop around the scheme or invest time into prospective players, whether that be draft related, free agency related. That it might then lean to be somebody internally because it's like, look, the scheme's already here, the players are already here. I know what you need. We'll fill the gap. Congratulations on your first coordinator position in the NFL.
What you just described sounded like settling, and I don't like that.
I
I
don't
don't like
either,
that.
but
They
I
should not
honestly
do that.
I feel like unless it's one of the big fishes, everybody's going to think this was a settle because
I mean,
there was no obvious internal promotion like a D'Amico, right? To
yeah,
supplant solid, like it doesn't
exactly.
exist right now. So I,
And that is my concern with the internal candidate right now. Like in the past, I'd be like, hell yeah, like let's do it. But right now, and just because last season they didn't go with the internal candidate, that tells me none of those guys were ready. Are they ready a year later? I don't know. They're still interviewing candidates. That also tells me an internal candidate isn't the favorite. I don't want them settling. So that would, yeah, at this moment, an internal candidate would be my maybe least favorite choice, and I would say it's likely that it would be an external candidate. Now, to counter what you were saying of, well, if they get an external guy, they're losing out on all this prep time. I mean, not all of the external candidates are free agents, you can say. Like there are some guys out there who are on other teams or maybe position coaches on other teams who are, scouting, who are getting ready for that process and on their respective team currently. So they're not missing out on the process. Sure, there's still that transition time that coach would need to then integrate into the 49ers way of things. But, I think maybe it's a little overblown you know, to say they would be losing out on it.
I just think I just want this done. I think
Yeah, I think you do too. I
I
think you
just
do
want
too.
it done. There's like I understand this is a really important decision, but I really do think at the end of the day, like this team is run by a control freak. So how much control is that person going to have? And if that's the truth, and that individual is going to be handcuffed a bit, then like insert name here, let's go and move on. Because Steph, I honestly feel like regardless, unless it's one of the splash ones, even if it is one of the splash names, that person's not here longer than a year, right? I mean,
Why?
if you're
Why though?
well, if it's Belichick, if it's Rabel, if it's Pete Carroll, like these guys would parlay it into their next head coaching job anyway, right? Like that's what they would use it for. Like they're not being out for a year. Here, look at, by all intents and purposes, a defense that's littered with stud players up and down, right? Like good potential that if they're well coached and well organized, that they're going to put up the stat lines, right? They're going to be in a position of success, and then just boom, right into the next. Like they're going to be the names that are mentioned again. And then if it isn't internal and all of our concerns come to fruition of like, hey, that person's probably not ready, otherwise they would have been named, then Kyle will just as easily, cut bait and be in this position again and do it all over again next year.
That's what I don't want.
I just think it's going to be that way no matter what. Like, I think that's the reality of what we're looking at.
Yeah. I keep saying it. I think the 49ers could use some stability. They need someone who isn't going to get poached away. They need someone who has done it before and is at a point in their career that they're not going to get poached away because, again, they've done it before. Like so an older
You're describing Brandon Staley.
No, I'm not. He's not that old.
Not old.
But no one will want him as a head coach.
He's not getting another head coach job on the short term, right? So like,
I mean, it could work out. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's not my favorite, like I said, but it could work out.
It is my least favorite of the options, but I understand it. I understand his last time as a defensive coordinator while coaching a very good LA Ram defense. Statistically, they were pretty darn good, but obviously, who I do podcasts with, who's a diehard Chargers fan. So I pay close attention to the Los Angeles Chargers and his tenure as a head coach. Not so good. And the defenses under a defensive minded head coach also not so good in terms of just statistical rankings.
Yeah, no, that's fair. And there was a Chargers fan who was in the comments earlier, and he says, wish you luck if Staley, if you end with him, fails at times. He had an amazing defense, but majority of the time he can't adjust post-half, and players said they are too confused. I mean, halftime adjustments are huge for any team. Like, you have to be able to adjust in the NFL. And yeah, it's concerning for players to say they are confused. And I would say if Joey Bosa has that firsthand experience of Staley and not being a fan of it, I can't imagine Nick Bosa is going to buy into it either. And he's one of those guys on defense that you do kind of have to listen to his opinion. You just signed him to a really big extension. He's one of the cornerstones of your defense. So for that reason, I don't think I can see the Brandon Staley hiring even happening.
I hope not. I don't know what else to say, but that's just not my choice,
Well, Weston, hopefully by next Monday, we are talking about the new defensive coordinator and the decision will be made.
God willing.
Jorge, what am I saying that is worrying you right now? Speak to me, man. I don't. Let me know. Yeah, Staley is not my first choice, but again, I kind of just see it as a favor to his agent and their agent to get that one done. That's why it was done. One of the first ones that was done, get it out of the way, okay, yeah. Cool, check. That's my hope, at least that's my hope. So really interested in seeing who the outside candidates are going to be this week, if we even hear about them before the hiring takes place.
Well, I think that's what I'm most intrigued about as well, is just tell me who those people are, right? Like, just give me the names,
which
right now.
Kyle very strategically gave us this somewhat uninteresting list of names first, so we would stop yapping about not knowing, and he's going to secretly meet with these external candidates. We're not going to know who they are. until
Totally
one of them
typical
gets
Kyle.
named as typical Kyle, man. Dude is
Typical Kyle.
calculated, man. Come on. But yeah, we'll keep tabs on this. At least we have some names. I was surprised like we hadn't gotten any. Turns out is because there was no movement yet. So I guess that'll explain it. But Weston, the 49ers are preparing for, the draft. The combine is going to be this week. You're going to have John Lynch in the house. He's going to speak to the media tomorrow. And, the scouts are going to be in attendance as well. Tariq Ahmad will be in attendance. I'm actually curious to see if someone will ask, and if John Lynch answers, who is the replacement for Adam Peters?
Yeah.
Because I would imagine whatever that move is, that would happen, at the combine or before the combine. So this new person gets to, use their new role, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, there's a lot of decisions the 49ers have to make. What we do know in addition to all this draft madness going on, we know that the NFL cap is booming. I mean, business is good for the NFL. And so there was a 30 million increase in the cap space for this season. That is good for the 49ers, of course. So it seems like they are going to have some flexibility. One restructure or two very well puts them in position to make all the moves they need to this offseason.
Yeah. You're not kidding. Business is booming for the NFL. Newsflash, it always is. Uh, it's just a matter of what they want to make the cap. But it's exciting to have the cap go up, especially with what was it, the 38 or almost $40 million in cap that they're carrying over from next year, and then having it be higher than anticipated. I think that gives them a lot of wiggle room to get creative with existing contracts, kick the can down the road a little bit like they do every year on some contracts, and worry about it when the number inflates even more because it goes up year over year. But I think it gives them an opportunity to be aggressive in free agency right now while they still have their starting quarterback on a rookie contract, right? Like the Brock Purdy extension is not happening this offseason. So it literally can't under the collective bargaining agreement. So you're entering another year with a rookie contract, and does that allow you to prioritize your homegrown guys, a la number 11 Brandon Ayuk, who is the hot topic of the offseason right now, right? Is he staying or is he going? And I think the favorable cap makes it a little bit more likely that he stays, but there's still plenty of time until that day happens.
It's actually hilarious how quickly we saw the Brandon Ayuk trade talk just vanish in thin air as soon as the new cap numbers for the NFL were released. Is like, oh, turns out the 49ers are able to do all the moves. Oh, imagine that, So yeah, I mean the 49ers are in a good spot. It seems like the NFL, of course, is going to continue growing every year, so they're going to be in the favorable side of these cap numbers going forward until they aren't, right? Like, eventually there's going to be some snag in the road, I'm sure. Happened maybe a couple years ago with COVID. I'm sure that slowed down the growth, but 49ers are in a good spot. So it was smart of them to project that and also build their contracts out as such, in preparation for that. So it's like they kind of know what they're doing, right? So the 49ers do have a lot of needs this offseason, as we know. Now, do you have a pen and paper around you, Weston? I should have mentioned this beforehand, but just
Always.
yeah, let's go. Okay, because what I
Always.
want you to do, Weston,
Are
is
we
just
doing a
write
little?
down. Yeah, that's what we're
Yeah,
gonna
all
do.
right.
My notepad is not as big, but we'll make it happen.
I'm an
Write
older
down the
man.
49ers needs. Just position. All right. Don't get too
Like
crazy, but just
like
main needs,
specific or
top
okay.
three positional needs. And I hope I'm not okay. All right. And let me know when you're ready.
I'm ready.
All right. Hope you guys can read this. All right. Oh, we're so close. Okay, so we both said offensive line, cornerback, and I said wide receiver or safety. There's a reason why that's kind of both. And then you said edge. So as far as that third one, obviously, like if Brandon Ayuk were to get traded, which I don't see happening,
No.
but I do think the 49ers do have to prepare, like as far as scouting goes, they have to prepare for that just in case. So you will probably hear the 49ers meeting with one of the top wide receivers. Like you will probably hear that. So that's kind of just if Brandon Ayuk gets traded away, that will be an immediate need for them. And I also say safety if they keep Brandon Ayuk, because obviously wide receiver would not be a need.
No.
But I like that you said edge too. Because I think edge is a position of need for the 49ers. But let's kind of tackle this first one, offensive line. There's a couple ways the 49ers can address this. And they, either through the draft or free agency or both. I mean, if you had to choose, like what's kind of how would you tackle the offensive line if you can choose?
It has to be both. And I know that's a cop out, right? But I think the draft is leverage for youth movement. But I still think obviously this team is win now mode. And I think the way that you bolster the interior of this offensive line, heck, even the entire right side, maybe the right tackle, is the immediate push should be around a savvy veteran, right? Somebody who's been a little bit of a journeyman, somebody that I almost think of like Laken Tomlinson. You remember his run here with the 49ers, right? Yeah, I know he's a former first round, but he fell well out of favor, right? Wasn't wanted in Detroit anyway. He got a fresh chance with new scenery. And boy, did he take advantage of that opportunity and turn that into a massive contract with the New York Jets. I think that's the philosophy that needs to take place. But I also think there has to be some youth behind it, specifically if we're talking about addressing the tackle position. And it's got to be somebody who, at least on paper, you feel confident can play both sides, right? Might be penciled in day one as your right tackle in a pinch, can go play left tackle, or at least as your backup swing, to a veteran. Because here's the reality. The right tackle is the need today, right now, the number one need on that offensive line, if you ask me. But that's only because Trent Williams is here. And honestly, we don't know how long Trent Williams, we feel confident he plays this season, right? I mean, that's what he told us. But his age, his status, you don't know where his emotions are right now in terms of like getting to the ultimate stage and then the letdown that goes. So you just don't know how long. And if you think you got your franchise quarterback, well, you got to find a way to protect them. It's that simple.
Yeah. I 100% agree. It needs to be both, just because, I mean, offensive line, there's a lot of guys you need for that. And so you need to have reserve guys as well as your starters, and they definitely need to fill. I think they need to upgrade, like you said, the right tackle position. I would love to see an upgrade at the right guard position as well. John Feliciano, as the free agent signing last year, I think did provide that upgrade. But I also think they kind of discovered that too late into the season. If he had started from week one and maybe got better with each week and kind of gelled with the group, would have been great. In fact, I wouldn't even be mad if they re-signed him, because I think he is a free agent after this. So wouldn't be mad if they re-signed him, but also just veteran free agents, I think, is the way to go, just to have some sort of safety net in case, these guys, whatever rookies you bring in, aren't ready day one, because most of them will not be. The 49ers have shown they rather develop guys than have them starting day one. Everyone brings up Mike McGlinchey. Well, Mike McGlinchey was literally a first-round pick, and an early first-round pick, and also who else did they have at that time? Like, they were literally building out the roster. So now these days they kind of like to develop guys. So I think it has to be both. I would love for the younger guys to be part of that depth, have, free agent veterans who, names that aren't sexy, names that guys don't really know, because the sexy names for offensive linemen are the guys who cost a ton of money. Yeah, and that, quite frankly, the 49ers can't afford. So if you can get a guy like Tomlinson, like you said, a Feliciano, the 49ers have shown they can find, like, guys who are the unsexy names and make them very serviceable in San Francisco. So if they can do that, and I think they could, as long as they hit on these freaking draft picks, and that is yet to be seen, because unless they're just still developing, I don't know. They need to. Like, is Spencer Burford ever going to pan out? That's a question I have. I don't know if he. I don't know.
If he does, great. If he doesn't, no harm, no foul, right? Like, it's not, to me.
I mean, it'd be nice, Weston. It'd be
It
nice.
would be nice because we have found gem for the collateral that you put into him, right? You didn't have to pay him money, still on a rookie contract. Like, yeah, you always want those guys to pan out. And believe it or not, tends to be the 49ers have their most success round 5 and beyond, right? Like, in the draft. And that's where he falls into. I think they've missed on a couple linemen, whether it's Burford, whether it's Nick Sakelj, right? Like, who just obviously hasn't been able to crack in even when there's been poor interior offensive line play. And that breaks my heart because I'm a Fordham grad. He's a Fordham grad. Nobody was rooting harder for Sakelj than I was. But they've had some misses. But I agree. This draft, for everything that we're going to talk about, like, they have to find 2 or 3 late round gems. They just do, to have to make, because we have very rarely not seen many of the early round selections pay off, right? It's just the way that's been for them. But what has saved this team are the Fred Warners, the George Kittles, the Elijah Mitchells, the Brock Purdys, right? The Tolanoa Hufungas, the Diamador Lenores, like, these individuals that are just late round picks. Which, tell me what's the difference between a 5th round pick and a 7th round pick is. Like, that's just a scout's evaluation, right? Like, that's where you just trust your people. They got to find a home run or two in this one as well to continue the youth movement in different spots. And God darn it, I hope at the least one of them's an offensive lineman.
Yeah, if they want to stop doing this kicking the can down the road with the cap situation, they have to start hitting on those early round guys.
Sure do.
Yeah, and I fear that the Trey Lance thing it has already started to catch up to them a bit, and they're just trying to run away from it a little. You have to be able to hit on these picks. This is a very pivotal draft. I mean, you could say that for every draft, but this one really feels like it's at a fork in the road for the 49ers, especially coming off like a Super Bowl loss. So the other need that we said for this team was cornerback, and I think that's pretty obvious, right? The question is, I guess before we can answer this, is when you think about Diamador Lenore, and by the way, Charvarius Ward, announced he had surgery just the other day. I mean, we didn't even know there was something wrong, but I guess it was yeah, exactly. I guess he's fine. And I'm assuming his recovery is probably not something that's he'll be ready basically for the start of the next season. So we shouldn't worry much about that. So the question I have for you is, when you think about Diamador Lenore, do you think the 49ers would prefer to keep him at the slot, or do they like him more on the outside? That's kind of the decision they have to make as well when they think about who to bring in as far as draft or free agents go. I guess it's nice that they have the flexibility either way, but I feel like you do kind of have to decide at some point.
Yeah. This is the need as corner is not a knock on Diamador Lenore. In fact, I think Diamador Lenore is the best corner on the football team, if I'm being real with you, because I think he can do more than Charvarius Ward can do in terms of where you can plug and play him. I think he's so good outside that it hurts when he goes inside, but it is so critical to this defense that they have a lockdown type slot corner. Like, you go back to, like, look how this defense looked when it was K1, right, for those years, right? And I know K1 was the best in the business to be doing it, but a guy who plays like a smaller linebacker who can cover all those people, can cover a lot of open field, cover a lot of shifty players. Like, I think Demo is really good in the slot, but I think it actually hurts the 49ers when he moves down there because I think he is that much better outside the numbers. I think he is that good of a corner. So if your best play is to move Demo into the nickel, into the slot, then it's not Ambry Thomas, right? So you
Yeah.
absolutely have to go find a guy. You got to go find two guys and hope that one of them
Yeah,
pans out
exactly.
to be that guy.
Yeah, and I know like the fan base is split on this. Like Callie in the comments says, I like Demo better at nickel. I've seen other people express that as well. Personally, I think I like him more outside. It's just his natural position. Yes, he is really good in the slot. I won't take that away from him. But I, if they can upgrade and they can find someone who's better at nickel, I think they should go that route. So, and by the way, as we were just talking about offensive linemen,
What
Laken
you got?
Tomlinson was informed by the Jets that he will be released.
Come
So that's interesting.
on down.
Oh, damn.
Come on down.
So that's interesting, right? The 49ers are going to have options there. That's great. Now for corner, one name you mentioned was sorry for whispering, touch grass. Sorry. For dramatic effect, that's why I whispered.
Right?
Okay, so yeah, for corner, you mentioned K1 Williams, and I think a reunion is possible there as well. Definitely, he's a free agent. I would welcome that. Here's what I think. As far as the starting guy or who will take that slot spot, I think I like a veteran option. But as we know, that isn't always like the best option. The 49ers probably thought that with Isaiah Oliver. That didn't pan out, right? So it doesn't
Yep.
always pan out. But I think I would like to go the veteran route. Just seeing where the corners are at on this team, I think I don't know. I like veterans. You have Ufunga and you have not Sean Gibson. Well, yeah, you have Gibson, but it's probably going to be Jair Brown, next season. So Brown, only young guy there. I would like that. Like if there was just the one young guy, and then a lot of veterans around him kind of thing. So what about you for the starting corner that the 49ers would want to bring in this offseason? Are you thinking draft or free agency?
If it's going to be the nickel, right, and that's the way they want to line it up, it has to be free agency. And it has to be free agency because it yeah, you want like some super athletic guy, right? Because that's what it's required to play in the slot. And you got to have a guy with a huge ego because you're going to be burnt a lot in the slot. It's a tough position. But I think veteran is, a K1. And I don't love falling like with the retreads. Like that's not my thing. K1 was just the best in the business, but you need a guy who's done it before. You need a savvy individual who has a high football IQ, especially at the NFL level, to play that position because that position's about space. It's about opportunity. It's about splits. It's about alignments. It's about formations. It's about so much more than just line up from the man across from you. You cover more space than you do players, in that position. So I think if you're looking for immediate contribution to success at the nickel slot, it has to be a veteran.
Yeah, and completely agree on that one. We're on the same page there. So for offensive linemen, we say both free agency and draft. For corner, we want to see a veteran in there. It would not surprise me if they also draft a corner. I know
you have
that
to.
Daryl. Yeah, you have to. So Daryl Luter is in the mix as well.
Womack.
But for Womack, but for depth, I like bringing in more corners through the draft. Now this third option we were kind of split on, right? I said wide receiver if Brandon Ayuk gets traded, which I think is unlikely, but if they do, for me, that would be a draft selection. Like that'd be someone you have to bring in through the draft. So you can keep it cost effective. And as far as safety, afterwards, I thought about it, and I didn't really like that I put safety because I don't, they
I
have their
like it.
starters, Hufunga and Brown. They need depth, though. They need depth
100%.
very badly. And when it comes to depth, I would like to see them replenish that through the draft.
Totally.
Now, the one I want to talk about is the one you listed as your third biggest need, and that was edge. So, do you kind of see that personally? I see it as both.
Yeah.
Either or both. Just because, like the offensive line, you need a lot of guys on the defensive line. We know how much they like to rotate their guys, how much those guys need the rotation to stay fresh. So I think realistically we see them target edge, both free agency and draft.
It have to. Listen, you can never have enough pass rush talent. Period. Point blank. Right? Like we mentioned about safeties. Like I'm of the school of thought you draft edge rushers, defensive backs, and quarterbacks every draft. Every draft. Every single. I don't even care who your quarterback is. Right? Like if you got a guy who's a diamond in the rough, good. You parlay that into trade bait. Like next season, no big deal, no sweat off your back. Right? Like those are the positions you always have to draft. Edge is the identity of this defense, right?
Yeah.
Like getting after the passer, which they struggled at immensely all season long, if you ask me. And then you got Gregory, Chase Young, right? Clayton Farrell. Gone. They're free agents, right? So do they come back? There's a lot of depth. And then you also we still don't know what Drake Jackson is. And that's a second round pick that's invested into that individual. So that leaves me with just talking about Nick Bosa.
Yeah.
And yes, he's the best in the biz, right? Like no doubt about it. But they need edge depth. And I think you will see one of those three, whether it's Chase Young, Randy Gregory, Cleveland Farrell, I would be willing to bet one of them is back, right? Then you have, but then the other ones, you got to go find your standard Chris Kasurek reclamation project because they have panned out to do well, right? They more often than not, they are contributing to this defense. And then, you got to go find some freaks in the draft, and you're not going to waste I don't know, saying your first round pick, right? I just don't know if I think the edge feels deep in this, right? And I think you can get some unsung type heroes in the second, third round if the board aligns properly. But you can't walk out of this draft with adding at least one pass rusher.
It felt like to me that in 2023, last off season, they didn't prioritize edge.
Nope.
And then in the season, they were retroactively trying to upgrade at edge because they didn't do it in the off season. That's what you don't want to have happen. It's not an ideal scenario. Your options are dwindled at that point. You end up having to trade for a Chase Young in the middle of the season, right? And even that, maybe didn't, live up to the expectations. So, yeah, I think they definitely have to prioritize it this offseason. And like you said, you still don't know what Drake Jackson is. Last offseason, they were banking on Drake Jackson to be the guy opposite Nick Bosa.
He had 3 sacks in week 1.
Hey, after that, I was optimistic, but
Me too.
But yeah, they can't bank on Drake Jackson developing into that guy. They have to replenish edge through free agency and the draft. And I think as always, there's going to be interesting names there. Yeah, losing Omenahue and Ebukam was huge for them. And they could have very well gotten guys at that caliber again. I actually thought Clinton Farrell, did a pretty good job in the season, and especially as the season went on, he was growing into being one of those guys. And yeah, Robert Beal Jr., I wouldn't say they prioritized it because Robert Beal Jr. was what was he 5th round, 6th round?
Yeah.
No,
he's a plus athlete. Rounds. He's a plus athlete with minimum.
He can develop
production. Yeah, if he can develop, that's what I'm talking about.
I'm saying he can develop into a rotational piece.
100%.
He part of the rotation. But as far as being one of those 2 first guys in the rotation, that's who the 49ers need to focus on. this off season. And yeah, there's going to be plenty of names. And yeah, next show, me and Weston, we'll talk about it. Some of the free agents who are available that the 49ers can target, as well as some of the names that stood out to us at the combine. But, and I'll just remind you guys, I won't be at the combine this off season or, this week, unfortunately. But like always, my draft sheet is going to be popping. So make sure you guys keep it locked, on Twitter. It's going to be getting a workout, right? Every day there's going to be new names that pop up of guys who met with the 49ers. We're going to get a better idea of who the 49ers are interested in out there. So make sure you guys keep it locked on my channel, on my Twitter, Steph49K and Weston. Make sure you subscribe to his channel as well. We're Talking Football Podcasts. And yeah, Weston, any closing words here?
Yeah, I've just, in light of what you were just talking about just locking in, because it's the time of year to lock in. Guys, if you don't already know, Steph's doing great player profile. She's interviewing a lot of these young guys that are going to be late round draft picks, undrafted free agents, where a lot of football teams are going to find diamonds in the rough and they're going to make their money. So if you want to start getting a better sense of the mentality of these individuals and some faces that the 49ers might kick some tires on, lock in. She's doing a great profile on these individuals. And I just wanted to give you props for that, Steph, because I've really enjoyed all the interviews you've had so far.
Thank you. And yeah, those are very purposeful because it's great to get to know these players. And also just a little tidbit, like most if not all of the guys that I bring in on those interviews are guys who have had some contact with the 49ers throughout the draft process. So yeah, just keep that in mind. And Spencer Wagee, who I interviewed last offseason, did get picked up by the 49ers as an undrafted free agent, and he's still with the team. So, yeah, it's a good way to get to know some of these guys in the draft. So make sure you guys keep it locked. Like this video if you haven't yet. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. But for now, have a good rest of your Monday, folks. Peace.